Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Tonight's class is in the merit of all Jewish people, especially the land of Israel, those who need healing, those who need rescuing, those that need success. God should get everything that they need. Okay, let's jump into this week's Torah portion. We actually have this week a double Torah portion, Parshas Bahar and Bechol Kosai, which is the end of the book of Vayikra, the end of the book of Leviticus. So it's a Chazak Shabbos. As we finish an entire book in the Torah, we say Chazak. We should be strong. So it's a special Shabbos because of that. It also has the Tochacha, Parsha B'Chukosai, has the part of the Torah that rebuke and what will happen, the curses that will happen when the Jewish people don't listen, and all those prophecies obviously have been fulfilled in the destruction of the first and second temple. So that is part of it. It's always before the holiday of Shavuos. However, and the same thing for Rosh Hashanah. The Tochel is a second Tochel in the book of Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy. That is also always for Rosh Hashanah, but it's never the week before. We don't want to go into the holiday with kind of a negative taste, so we always have one more Torah portion at least between the rebuke and between the holiday. So, which is a good reminder to if you're coming for Shavuos to services, we're having God willing, we're going to be having the reading of the Ten Commandments and a wonderful Kiddush. If you please register, you could RSVP on our website. Helps us prepare. Okay, let's get into it. So we're going to be discussing the beginning of the Torah portion of Bahar, the beginning of this double portion. And the Torah says as follows: And God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying. And then, after this verse of God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, it begins to describe the laws of Shemitah, the laws of the seventh year. Now we know that on the Torah tells us that for 6 years you're supposed to plant and have this agricultural system. That's how Israel was in ancient times, was mostly agricultural, and that's what the Jewish people did for a living. And then on the seventh year, the land is supposed to lay fallow, and the land is supposed to be not to be worked, and we're supposed to focus on Torah study and serving God during this year, and then then we start the cycle again and again for 6 years you work. So going back to what he said, so the Torah portion again, right after it says that God spoke to these laws, God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, and then it goes over these laws of Shemitah, the seventh year. So Rashi right away, the foremost commentary on the Torah, he right away comments Mount Sinai, and he gives the one of the most classic questions in the Talmud: Ma inyan Shemitah Har Sinai? What does Shemitah have to do with Har Sinai? And this is, if you go to a yeshiva, this is a classic refrain. People use what does Shemitah have to do with Mount Sinai? And it's kind of like an expression. If you come in the Torah world, becomes an expression of like, what does this have to do with anything? It's kind of like the English equivalent of what does it have to do with the price of tea in China, right? So what does Shemitah have to do with Har Sinai? And Rashi explains why he's asking the question. Aren't all the mitzvahs commanded from Mount Sinai? So Rashi explains that he gives the answer as follows. Rather, just as the details and laws surrounding Shemitah were given out Sinai, so too the details and laws of all the mitzvahs were given out Sinai. So again, Rashi is saying we learn from this the fact that the Torah gives us many details of this laws of the Shemitah year that teaches us that all laws were given from Mount Sinai. And that means that not just the general laws were given at Mount Sinai, not just God said, okay, do this, and because there are many things in Torah it says like that, right? For example, let's use the mitzvah of tefillin. It says there should be a sign on your head. So I might think God said there should be a sign on your head, and then Moses or the rabbis, right, or the Talmud, they made it up. They said the tefillin has to be a box, it has to be black, it has to be worn by men, it has to be worn during the day. It's not true. Every single detail was given from God to Moses. Now, some of it was written specifically in the written Torah, and some of it was given a tradition in the oral Torah, or the oral Torah gave rules of how to understand the laws from the written Torah. But that was all transmitted from Moses, from God to Moses to the Jewish people, and 3,337 years ago, to be precise. So, and again, during this 40-year period from when they received the Torah until they go into the land of Israel, Moses would continually receive laws from on Mount Sinai, or meaning that he had heard on Mount Sinai, and he would teach them, or laws that God told him later, but it's all directly from God. That is the point of, that is what Rashi is teaching us in this very important lesson. Now, the question is, there are many laws that are discussed in detail in the Torah. And the question is, why is it that the Torah uses specifically this mitzvah of Shemitah, of keeping the seventh year holy, that we don't work in the field in the seventh year in the land of Israel? Why is that the mitzvah that we use to teach us this law? There are many mitzvahs. In fact, maybe there are better mitzvahs. For example, like we said, Shemitah is only done in the land of Israel. Shemitah is also only done by farmers. If I work in finance, I don't have to keep Shemitah. Another specific thing is Shemitah is something that is a mitzvah that is not a constant mitzvah, because it only applies, even if you're a farmer, even in the land of Israel, only applies when you're working in the field. It doesn't apply to your entire day-to-day life. But for some reason, we're going to explain right now a few reasons why the Torah specifically picked the mitzvah Shemitah, this mitzvah, to teach us that every single detail was given from Mount Sinai. Okay, so the first thing, we're going to take a step back for a minute and talk about, there's a principle in the Torah that is brought, one of the 13 principles of faith that Maimonides brings, that the Torah will never be changed, and Torah is everlasting, and Torah is eternal. And the question is, what? And that is because the Jewish people keep the Torah. That's what keeps us eternal. And if we look at the Jewish people historically, we're not always the strongest nation. In fact, we were conquered many times. We were slaves in Egypt. We were conquered by the Babylonians, the Romans, etc. But if you look at the Jewish people, we're still here. Comparatively, let's look at the Egyptian people. Where are the Egyptians who enslaved the Jewish people? Those people are gone. Where are the Babylonians who conquered the temple? Where are the Syrian Greeks that ruled over the second temple area? Where is the Romans? Where are all these nations have gone out? And the reason is because this essence of Judaism is keeping of the mitzvahs. And when we keep the mitzvahs, since the mitzvahs are eternal, that's what keeps the Jewish people eternal. And this is not true just generally about the mitzvahs, but again, about details of the mitzvah. In other words, it's not the fact that Jewish people generally kept Shabbos, but we keep Shabbos the same way that they kept Shabbos coming out of Mount Sinai. We keep Shabbos and we put on tefillin the same exact boxes that they did in the desert, they did in the land of Israel for thousands of years, for over 3,336 years. That's the same mitzvahs that we've been doing this entire time for thousands of years. And because we keep the mitzvahs in this detailed way, that is what keeps us, that's what makes the Jewish people eternal. And many times throughout history, there have been people who have come with great ideas, and they said, you know what, listen, the mitzvahs are not so important. The fact that we have to keep mitzvahs, we have to keep all the details of the mitzvahs. There have been many movements and many ideas throughout Jewish history that have come to try to propagate this idea. Now, when it comes to generally in ideas, there is sometimes we have to kind of see how things play out, right? So, for example, if a person has a new idea in medicine, you kind of have to see how things play out. But once you see that this new idea is not working, you have to go back to the tried and true. You cannot say, well, let's see what happens further. At some point, if you're a doctor in medicine, you have an idea and the patient is suffering and your new idea is not working, you got to go back to the tried and true. And actually, it'll be malpractice for you to continue trying this new idea. Now, that's when you actually have an actual new idea. What if you have an idea that's been tried and true 1,000 times, and you know every single time it's never worked, and every single time it's failed miserably, and every single time the patient did not survive? Then that would be malpractice to even try such an idea. And that is how it has been with mitzvahs. There have been many movements. Let's take, for example, the first movement was 40 days after the giving of the Torah. After Mount Sinai, the Jewish people saw God. They heard God. They saw things that can only be heard, and they heard things that can only be seen. And the God spoke to them and told them the 10 Commandments. And 40 days later, they worshiped a golden calf. Why? No idea. Okay, what happened? What happened to those people? They were all killed. They all died. They were killed. They died. Whatever happened to them? Different people. Some of them did repent, but that's it. The golden calf movement died right then and there. Okay, then there's the next movement in Jewish history. There's the Baal movement. You're familiar with Tanakh. You're familiar with the prophets. There was a very popular idol, must have been on sale or something in the land of Israel. It's called the Baal. And Elijah eventually got rid of that, and those people were gone. Either they assimilated to other nations, or they were killed, or they died. The same thing under the second temple era. There was the Tzedukim and Baitusim, which were the Sadducees and the Bethusins, whatever they were called, which were basically people who said that the Torah is only the written Torah. Anything that's in the oral Torah tradition from the rabbis is all fake, which was obviously a lie. And in fact, not only it's a lie, it's obviously untrue, because if you try to, the only way you know what the Torah says is because you have a tradition, right? If I tell you this is Aleph and this is Beis, and the next day I tell you this is Beis and this is Aleph, how do you know which one I'm telling you is true? The only way you know is a tradition. And the same thing applies, right? How do I know what a sign is? When the Torah says I should put a sign on my arm and between your eyes, how do you know what that is? The only way to know is the Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? The oral law, the tradition that we have. And these people, they rejected the tradition. What happened to those people? Either they assimilated, they became part of the Romans, the Sadducees, or they what you call it? Either they assimilated, or they were killed, or they died. There's no more Sadducees today. But the Jewish people who keep the Torah mitzvahs the same way as the people who are not Sadducees kept it in the time of the Second Temple, those people are still around. So we see that this is a proof. This is a proven idea, proven thing, that new ideas, when it comes to the Torah mitzvahs, specifically the keeping of the mitzvahs, these ideas are been tried for thousands of years. As long as we've had Judaism, we've had offshoots of Judaism. Literally 40 days later, we've had people who try to say, don't have to keep the mitzvahs. We don't have to keep the mitzvahs. And those people are gone. But we see the Jewish people, the people who keep the Torah mitzvahs, those people have survived. And therefore, such an argument doesn't even have to be contended with. So when people come and say, listen, in the old world, you had to keep Torah mitzvahs. Today, we're modern, right? Today, this is old news. And those people who tried that 1,000 years ago, who tried it 100 years ago, they're gone. But the only true Torah Judaism is keeping the mitzvahs exactly, all the details. And this is why God specifically chose this mitzvah of Shemitah with all the details, and said that this is the one that was given at Mount Sinai, and this is the mitzvah that teaches us that every single mitzvah was given at Mount Sinai. Why Shemitah? Because Shemitah is a mitzvah that goes throughout the year. It goes through, and specifically the Torah explains in our Torah portion that there are many different. This mitzvah applies to the entire year: the planting, the harvest, the cold, the heat, in the summer, and the winter. And this teaches us that no matter what is going on in the world around us, whether it's the cold or the hot, the mitzvahs apply. The details of the mitzvahs apply. It's not enough that we keep Shabbat, just like we're talking about keeping the seventh year of Shabbat is a similar idea, right? We rest on the seventh day, and not the seventh year, but every seventh day. And right? And it's not enough that we just say, listen, I keep Shabbat in theory, I don't go to work on Shabbat, but I don't, there's many laws of Shabbat. There's laws about how you're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to use electricity, you're not allowed to make fire, you're not allowed to carry outside of a enclosure, etc. And a person says, listen, I just keep, I mark it on my calendar. I know, just like my ancestors kept Shabbat, I also keep Shabbat. But that's not it. It has to be the details. The details apply in every generation, no matter what. Just like in the Shemitah year, it has to be kept throughout the entire season, no matter what's going on around you, no matter it's modernity, the Ice Age, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, whatever is going around you, we have to keep the Torah mitzvahs exactly the same way, because that is what keeps us as an eternal people. The second lesson we can learn about the mitzvah of Shemitah specifically is that Shemitah is a mitzvah that applies to do the two different types of things. As we said, you're not allowed to work the land. Now, there are two things you could grow. You can grow crops that are vital to survival, like grain. People can't survive without bread, without grain. And there's a second type of food you could grow. It's called fruit. And fruit trees, orchards, whatever you want to call them, fruit is not necessarily vital to survival. While there are health benefits to fruit, it helps digestion, whatever it may be. Fruit is not necessary to survive. You can survive without fruit. Might not be, but what does fruit do? Fruit brings enjoyment and it's pleasure to your life, and therefore the mitzvah Shemitah applies to both a grain, and it applies also to orchards. And this teaches us that when we do a mitzvah, it can't just be that we're doing mitzvahs, right? We talk about we have to do all these details of the mitzvahs. It's not just that we have to do the mitzvahs to survive. We have to do the mitzvahs with joy. The same way we have the crops, the food that we need to survive, we also have to have the food that we just enjoy life a little bit. We see this specifically in regular day-to-day life. When it comes to our families and our children specifically, there are things that we need, right? We just said we need bread. Okay, so we need bread, but we all try to make sure that our families have things that are just for enjoyment, right? We don't just serve our families every night peanut butter and jelly. It's like, you need this to survive, you'll be just fine. We always try to find things that give our children a little enjoyment, a little dessert, right? A nice toy. It doesn't have to be, we're not talking about extravagant money or anything like that, but we all try to find things for our children that we want to do that make life worth living, as they say, to make life enjoyable a little bit. Those are important things. God gave us this gift of enjoyment, and that's what trees and fruit represents. And it's important that when we do Torah and mitzvahs, the same thing. It's not just that we're doing it to survive, as we just explained, that this is the survival of the people. We have to do it with joy. If you want your children to be excited about it, if you want your children to have a relationship with your children centered around Judaism, it has to be enjoyable. It has to be with pleasure, with simcha. And if we do it as a burden, that will not be something that we're able to pass on to the next generation. And it also, the last thing we could say that about Shemitah, that is specific to Shemitah, is that Shemitah applies to earth, to the most earthly things that we have. Literally, the land, dirt, trees, crops, farming. And we see that actually through this 7th year, the Jewish people elevated not just the 7th year fruit, but it elevates their entire lives, and it elevated the entire cycle, the entire 7 years, all the 6 years of work elevates, even the 7th year elevates the following 6 years of work, or the previous 6 years of work, however you want to look at it. But the point is that Judaism and Torah mitzvahs can't just be something that we do and it's important, but it has to elevate our lives. We have to let it elevate our day-to-day lives. Not just something we do in the synagogue, not just something we do on the weekends, not just something we do when we have nothing better to do, or because we have to. We do it with joy. We do it all the time. We do it no matter what's going on around us. And of course, we have to let it elevate this earthly realm. And through that, we will be able to pass on Judaism to the next generation. So it's very important for every single one of us. We all could find things, all a detail in a mitzvah. We don't have to take on every detail all at once, but find a detail in the mitzvah that speaks to you, a detail in the mitzvah that you are not doing until now, or you're not careful about until now, or you haven't been done with joy until now. Find that detail and do it with joy. Do it with passion. Do it in a way that other people want to do it with you. And like this, you will be part of the eternal people, the eternal Jewish people, and you will pass on Judaism to the next generation. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful Shabbos. And God willing, we will see you next week.